All right, wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. We're really excited about this program. My name's Chris Jacobs, uh, the Executive Director at Pinewoods Camp. And this is the second in our series, Winter Zoom series, all about the Six Ponds region called the Past, Present, and Future. If you missed the last program, back in February, from about the Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe. It is now, the YouTube video is up, and I'm actually just posting the link to the Zoom series in the chat. So you can go ahead and take a look there, and you can register for our next one that is coming up in April, and I'll tell you a little bit more towards the end. But for now, I want to go ahead and welcome Sam Chapin, our guest tonight, and very excited about this program and to learn more about the Six Ponds region and the history. Just a little bit about Sam. He has been involved with Pinewoods for many years, and I have a great story where I was learning about all the septics at camp, and I got to go to the Sam Chapin School of Septic Unit. So thank you, Sam, for spending so many hours with me that day. He lives on Long Pond, where he spent summers as a child, the fourth generation of his family to do so. And he currently serves as the chair on the board of Wildlands Trust. And of course, he's our local historian extraordinaire. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam, and I'll be monitoring the chat feature, but we are going to hold all the questions until the end. So welcome, Sam. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. The ninth grade lot in the Six Ponds, some historical notes. I love talking about the history of this area. The inspiration for my talk is this booklet here, which was written by my grandmother. And it contains a lot of history and a lot of the results of a lot of research that she did. Now, the ninth great lot in about 1710, the town fathers of Plymouth divided the lands to the south of town into 10 great lots and apportioned them out to some of the settlers in Plymouth. We need to acknowledge that, in fact, a lot of this land wasn't theirs to give away anyway, because the natives had lived here for thousands of years, and the European settlers, considered the land theirs and were in the process of displacing and disenfranchising the Native Americans. But as they say, that is history. So they divided the portion of the southern part of town into 10 great lots. And the limits of the ninth great lot are approximately shown on the map on the cover of this book. We have Long Pond, Halfway Pond, we have Little Long Pond, we have a post office here, Raymond P.O., more about that later. But this is pretty much the limits of the ninth great lot. In 1710, the great lots were split up and were each lot was further subdivided. This is the description from the proprietor's book, The Ninth Great Lot. I'm not going to read this, it's a lot of old-fashioned language, but it does make reference to Long Pond in here, and it makes reference to the Agawam Path, which is very likely the historic roadway that now part of it is known as the Herring Way. In old documents, the Agawam Path, the Halfway Pond Path, the Herring Way, it's used in a number of different names. The grantees of the ninth great lot are down here. There are some familiar Plymouth names here: Bradford, Faunce, Harlow, Morton, There's Clark, Deacon Thomas Clark. His share of the ninth grade lot was where Clark Road intersects Long Pond Road now. So it's fairly evident that Clark Road was named after this Clark. There's a slightly more explicable description in William T. Davis's History of the Town of Plymouth. I will read very briefly. In 1710, all the remainder of the lands ungranted, amounting to 30,000 acres, was laid out in 10 great lots and distributed. The ninth is bounded by the Mast Road, Halfway Pond, Long Pond, and the Herring Path, and the Sandwich Road. Though the Herring Path, Herring Way, Agawam Road, those are probably all the same things. Let's take a look at some early maps. I have maps in this presentation. I have documents. I have photographs. I'm a map fan myself, so we're going to take a look at a couple of maps. Here is 1830, surveyed by S. Bourne. We have the 6 ponds. We have largely forested. The Mast Road is on here, still called the Mast Road. We have a couple of buildings and some cleared area. Pinewoods Camp, of course, is right where my cursor is. And even this early, we have a school. The first school was out here as early as 1803, which indicates that there was sufficient settlement in this land at that time to support a school. Now, about this same time, people had been talking about a Cape Cod Canal for years. And we have here a map, a survey of a valley and ponds auxiliary to a contemplated canal between Buzzards and Barnstable Bays. Now, the Cape Cod Canal was talked about for generations before it was actually built. Originally, the first thought was that it'd go between Hyannis and Cape Cod Bay, but it ended up from the head of Buzzards Bay up to Cape Cod Bay. But originally the canal was going to be not a sea level canal. It was going to have locks. And the canal that's not a sea level canal needs water sources. And so they usually will intercept rivers in there along the route. So here we have, and anyone who knows the topography is should be pretty amused by this, a canal going from Long Pond to Bloody Pond, down through this little pond called Black Pond, Little Herring Pond, and then the Monument River. Now, of course, when they built the canal, the Monument River was largely displaced by the Cape Cod Canal, but that was back in the day before, environmental impact reports and, nice details like that. So we have another map here. This is an 1857 segment of a map of the town of Plymouth. We start to see some of the names of some of the settlers, some of the early residents from the European descent around our 6 ponds. Douglas, a lot of Douglas over here at Halfway Pond. We see Pierce, Manter, Thrasher, Hathaway, Raymond, Nickerson. These names are going to come up time and again. This is a more accurate map as far as the ponds themselves are concerned. We have the island at Halfway and the island at Little Long Pond. We still have the school here. We have the brook to Round Pond was still in existence at that time. This, of course, was known as Long Pond Village. And over here towards the bay, we have Indian Brook. And Indian Brook is actually part of our story here. The Briggs family grew cranberries and were active in Indian Brook for many generations. We also have a handful of thrashers here. Thrasher was also on the north end of Long Pond, and this part of Plymouth became known as Thrasherville until most of the houses were destroyed in a great fire in 1900, and we'll have more of that a little later on. The USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, got involved in mapping. This is an 1889, an early USGS map, and we see well, there's no Little Long Pond Island, but Halfway Pond Island, still the river, still the brook down to Round Pond. We have Halfway Pond Road, so-called here. We have this road here, which is now the Herring Way. We have Bloody Pond. We have Clark Road. We have Mast Road here. So this is a map that I really like. We have another map here. I'm sure you've seen, if you like looking at maps, that there are names of, of houses, names of people on a lot of these old maps. This is approximately 1900, and there's a lot on here. We have some of the early summer residents, including Stearns up here, Collingwood, they were actually Thrasher relatives, Morgan, H. Davis, we have Emory here. Over on this side, we have C. Davis, that's Charles Davis. We have Probst, we have Brown, we have Stoddard, lots of Raymonds, Pierce. Over in Halfway Pond, we have Barkers, who were in business with the Briggses growing cranberries. But interestingly, on this map, there's a couple of interesting things. There's a school, which is still there. The PO, the Raymond PO right here, which only lasted about 10 years, but there was the post office. And we also have the Union Chapel, which is the Long Pond Church that is there today. And also, if you look right here, you see an oval. That oval was a race course, a horse racing track that was owned and operated by Fred Hatch. And if you look at the land records in this part of Plymouth, there are quite a few entries where a partial interest in a piece of land is granted, 1/25th interest, 1/12th interest, this kind of thing. And I'm told that the reason for this, which is, it's a title examiner's nightmare, but the reason for this is because people who lost horse races and couldn't pay their debts would pay by, granting fractional interests in their property to their neighbors. And so you have quite a lot of that going on down here. And then lastly, we have cemeteries. This cemetery, which is near Halfway Pond Road and Long Pond Road, this is still very much in existence. This cemetery right here on the Herring Way, still very much there. There's a few other cemeteries in the neighborhood. And then, so this is late enough, so some of the summer folk, not just the people that were living here in the early 18th century and in the 17th century, but some of the summer folks are right here. So one more map-like structure here. We have an aerial photograph. This is 1947, this was taken. This is Long Pond and Round Pond and Bloody Pond. A couple of interesting things here. You see up here the cranberry bog has been built. My cursor is right on it, which interrupted the flow between Long Pond and Round Pond. That then became an impoundment and a controlled flow. But most fascinatingly, you can see where my cursor is here, you can see an oval. You can see the remains of the race course in the vegetation, the different vegetation that had grown up on the race course itself. And one other fun fact about this photograph down here where my cursor is now circling this open area, that was the Long Pond dump. That is where all the households took their garbage and their trash and threw it in a pile. The Long Pond dump, which was closed sometime in the 1950s. The Six Ponds Association, one of the reasons that it was originally formed was because the dump was becoming a nuisance. And the Six Ponds Association lobbied to have it closed down, and it was closed down. So we're going to move on a little bit from maps, but I do want to point out on this one, Turner. We have Turner lived in what was Tower Hill Farm, and it was quite a large spread. And Mr. Turner was from New Jersey, and his house did burn down in the Great Fire, but he rebuilt it right away. And there's a wonderful stone tower up there off what is now called Steeplechase Road. And we're going to take a look at a photograph taken from that stone tower. This is in my grandmother's photo albums. It says, "From the top of Turner's Hill." And we have Little Long Pond in the foreground, Gallows Pond over here in the right. This is Long Pond. And this point right here where my cursor is, that's Cornish Point. That's where the Conants live now. That was part of Helen Starrow's properties. And we will get to a little more of Helen Starrow in a bit. Old buildings, the Faunce Memorial Church here was, the services started in Long Pond Village in 1830. A man named William Faunce would walk from Plymouth out on Sundays and preach in the Little Red Schoolhouse. What was then called the Long Pond Memorial Chapel, this building was built in 1888 and incorporated in 1927 as the Faunce Memorial Union Church. It's still an active congregation. This bell tower here was an add-on. The original building, I suspect this L here is also an add-on, but this was the original building, and the bell tower was added later. So we're going to take a look at what is, I believe, the oldest house in the neighborhood. This is a Thrasher house, now on Clark Road at Long Pond, very well kept up by descendants of the original Thrasher family, and descendants are still there. Here's another view of it. This time of year when the leaves are down, and it affords a good view. This is what it looks like from Clark Road. And when you turn from Long Pond Road down, going around the north end of Long Pond, if you look to the left near Thatcher Road, you will see this. Interesting story about that. Thatcher Road, which goes off of Clark Road, was subdivision road when the Stearns sold their property in the 1960s for development. The developer went to Ruth Steinway, my grandmother, and said, "I have to put in a subdivision road here, a development road. What do you suggest I call it? I'm looking to name it something that has some relevance to the neighborhood." And my grandmother said, "Well, of course you should call it Thrasher Road, because of all the land down here and all these houses were the Thrasher family houses." So Mr. Delisle said, fine. By the time he got back to his engineering company who was designing the subdivision, he couldn't remember Thrasher, so he said, Thatcher, let's call it Thatcher Road. So Thatcher Road there actually should be Thrasher Road. And it's kind of a shame, I think, that it isn't, because it would have kept the name alive. This is a barn and a shed, part of that same building. I love the stonework here, and the clean lines of this building is really wonderful. Now, the early settlers and some of the summer folk, but mostly the early settlers around the Six Ponds lived by what they could: wood cutting and wood milling. There was a stave mill on the Agawam River in the 1840s, and a number of other sawmills here and there. Mast Road is so-called Mast Road because the large white pine trees that grew along it were wonderful lumber, and the best ones were cut down and used as masts on sailing ships. So it was lumber, wood cutting, fishing, of course. The locals would go over and keep their boats at Ellisville and fish out of Ellisville. And then starting about 1870s, cranberry cultivation became a serious pursuit. Now, cranberries, of course, need acidic soil, sandy soil. We have that in abundance in this neighborhood. They also, cranberries, of course, need a lot of water. So the bogs were situated, such as the one between Round Pond and Long Pond, where the water would flow by gravity. The Barkers at Halfway Pond were the first growers to actually have a pump, and they had a steam-powered pump over on their bogs in the upper part. I don't know exactly where, Halfway Pond or the Agawam River, but they were the ones who had the first one. This is a photo of Briggs Cranberry operation about 1950 maybe. I don't have any earlier ones, but this is a great shot. You can see the boxes. These berries were dried pick in boxes and in bags. And I believe that there's a bit of a screening operation going on right there. And you can see the man is standing on a box, a cranberry box that says Briggs on it, which is pretty nice. So the summer folks started moving in, and the natives were not always in favor of having their territory occupied by summer folks. The summer people were disdained by some of them, but they sold them their land, they built the summer folks houses, they cut their wood, they cut their ice, they sold them vegetables, they sold them livestock, they sold them hay. These are 4 of these locals who did most of the work. We have on the left Elmer Raymond, who built a lot of houses in this neighborhood. Bert Manter with the substantial mustache and the jaunty hat. Harry Woodward and Archie Manter. The Raymonds were important for the neighborhood. Elmer did a lot of building and cranberry growing. John Raymond, his brother, worked for Helen Starrow for a while. There were 4 or 5 Raymond brothers who were born, late in the 1800s, and I'm told that they were very competitive with each other, and they didn't want to cooperate on much. They each had their own little areas that they worked in, and they were very competitive with each other. So the summer folks started 1870s, 1880s. I want to read a brief excerpt from an article in the Boston Sunday Globe. This is dated August 19th, 1900. It's called In the Plymouth Wilds. Subtitle, Forest as Deep and Tangled as When the Pilgrim Fathers Landed with Blunderbuss and Axe. Bostonian of today makes a journey through thickets where once the red men hunted deer and palefaces. The language is what it is, 1900. I'm not going to revise it. This is it's history. It's what it was. Plymouth has the largest township in the state, the oldest civilization, the most dramatic history, and the greatest wilderness. Between Plymouth Village on the north, Buzzards Bay on the south, Carver and Wareham on the west, and the shore on the east is an immense tract of barren woodland, as sparsely settled as it was 2 centuries and a half ago. From the first, there seemed much hesitancy about settling in the Plymouth woods. The woods of pine and oak could not be cleared without great labor, and even when a clearing was made, the soil proved to be poor and unproductive. The salt marshes and cedar groves to the north of Plymouth seemed far more attractive, so the southern country was left to a few hardy men who, like the Indians they displaced, lived chiefly by fishing and hunting. And then a few paragraphs later, he goes on, what with combinations of owners and labor savings machinery, the old settlers see in cranberry picking a fading opportunity and believe that the future of Plymouth woods will depend upon the summer visitor and his demand for milk, eggs, berries, ice, and service. Yet this summer visitor is wonderfully slow in coming. It is not because the distances are so great, but rather because the roads are so poor that this is so. The bicycle is effectually shut out of it and the sandy wood roads, and the automobile has not yet made the attempt. This was 1900, mind you. Um, I'm going to jump here to a brief excerpt from a treatise that Rose Briggs wrote about the cranberry industry, but she has a short paragraph about those terrible roads. She says, "It took experience to build a good dirt road. That would not be too sandy in summer or too muddy in winter. The road material had to be a happy proportion of gravel and loam. I remember that test holes were being dug, and my father deciding that one lot would do, while another was no good." So one of the first uh, summer settlers was James B. Stearns, and we're going to go back here, and we're going to take a look at. This is an assessor's map, Plymouth assessor's map from 1949, and it has some of the larger land holdings on it annotated. The Stearns land was over here, and in fact, the Stearns land surrounded Little Long Pond. We have Barker land over here, and Barker land, in fact, went all the way around Halfway Pond onto the other side. Some of it was shared, I believe, with the Briggses. We had Morgan land here. We had Howland Davis here. These were summer folk. We had Emery here. Emery's had a shoe factory in Plymouth. They were sort of hybrid summer, not really summer folk. Their descendants still have this property here, and they owned a great deal of land in various areas around here. When you do deed research around Long Pond, the name Emery pops up quite a bit. So James B. Stearns was a Boston banker. He bought this land, bought a house that had been built 50 years earlier, and he formed a hunting and fishing club, the Oar and Line Club. And the Oar and Line Club was right here where my cursor is. The house still stands and is occupied. There were some notable people that went to the Oar and Line Club. Senator Daniel Webster came down from Marshfield and would hunt in these woods, guided by a man named Branch Pierce. And Pierce land was over in here between Gallows, Little Long, and Round Pond. Joanna Morgan established land here, and her cousin Howland Davis here, about 1880s and 1890s. And so a lot of these families still have their descendants living here. Stearns, Briggs, Emery, Davis, Barker, Bird, those were some of the summer folk. And then Pierce and Bassett were and Douglas, of course, were some of the residents before the summer residents whose descendants still live in the area. Now, of course, for these summer houses, there was no electric power. There was no refrigeration. There was life was pretty simple. Electric line power didn't come out to these woods until the mid 1930s. And interestingly enough, my grandmother, who built this house here, right where my cursor is pointing, they had a telephone in the house before they had electric power, which I think is fascinating. But in order to cool your food in the summer, you had to have an ice house. And so these fellows here would load ice. This is the Steinway place, about 1916. This is an ice house here, the one on the right. And you can tell it's an ice house by a number of reasons. First of all, it's fairly tall on a relatively small footprint. Uh, it has an upper door. You can see here there's a loft door as well as one or two doors here. And that was to facilitate getting ice in and getting ice out. There was a ladder, often a ladder, so you could get up to that door. These shovels here was because sawdust was used to insulate the ice. And if you were going to go in there and hack out a piece of ice to take over and put in your ice box, you would have to sweep out the the sawdust first. Incidentally, the international ice trade, successful international ice trade in the 19th century, was started by a man who lived pretty close to our neighborhood, Frederick Tudor by name, who made a fortune cutting ice on New England ponds and sending it to places like Indonesia and South America in the hold of schooners packed with sawdust. The Tudor place is Grazing Fields Farm down on Borndale Road, interestingly enough, and his descendants still live there as well. So each summer place had an ice house, and you can see there are a handful of ice houses still around. For you Pinewoods folks, you might recognize the Boatman. This is one of the Pinewoods cottages, which is on the shore of Round Pond, and is occupied in the summer as a cottage for Pinewoods. Here's a Thrasher ice house. This is on the shore of Long Pond, on the property of that oldest house, that well-kept oldest house that we looked at before. Not far from there is another ice house, or the remains of one. This, no doubt, on the other side, the other gable end of this, there are doors going down to the ground, but it's right on the edge of the bank, and I couldn't get a decent photograph of that. So not only did you have need ice, but you also needed water, of course. And so there would be a pump house and a pump down by the water. And we have a few of the water towers. This is one on the Emery Place on Long Pond Road. There was a pump down at Long Pond that would pump the water up. It was so high above the pond that there was an auxiliary pump, I'm told, in this little building that would take the water and pump it up into the water tower here. And by there it would flow by gravity down to the house. This is a water tower. This was on the Davis farm that was built after the Great Fire in 1900. Modern safety practices might suggest that dancing around on top of the water tower here was not the greatest idea, but in 1902 or so, when this photo was taken, we had different standards. This water tower today might be recognizable to some. It is now part of the Davis Douglas farm, right by the entrance road, and it's been spruced up to kind of be the entrance beacon for the Wildlands Trust headquarters at Davis Douglas Farm. The buildings in the background, this one on the left was a farmhouse built by Howland Davis for his farmer. And he had resident farmers named Douglas and named Redding, both names still in the area. The Steinways had a pump house that looks like this today. We still use this, although of course all of the infrastructure has been different. But we use it for irrigation. We pump water out of the pond and use it for irrigating the garden. The Steinways had their own water tank, and the foundation for which is right here. It came down in the 1950s. But now we have sort of a modern water tank right on here. Um, there was interesting few invoices here. Going back briefly to the icing, um, one had one's ice cut in the winter and stored for the summer. Here we have an invoice uh, to Mr. Steinway from Charles W. Redding, whose ancestors still live at the intersection of Halfway Pond Road and Long Pond Road. And this says 10 men icing for one day at $2.50 a day. Now that's what he charged for these laborers. They probably made $1.50 or something. 3 teams karting one day, $5. We presume a team is 2 horses dragging chunks of ice cut on the surface of the pond up to the ice house. 6 loads of sawdust at $6 each. Now, what fascinates me about this is the most expensive part of getting your ice in was the sawdust. The sawdust here costs more than, 10 days, 10 man days of labor, or 3 teams carting horses, three teams of horses. We have labor for man filling in ice house with gravel, $5. I don't know how that compares to the 250 up here. Maybe it was considered a more skilled job, but also this invoice included 5 cords of oak wood at $5.50 a cord. So for a total of $108.50, you got your ice and your wood for the summer. That's quite a lot of money for 1916 money. And I think about that when I complain about paying my oil bill these days. This was not insubstantial. Received payment. Thank you, Charles Redding. I also have an invoice for installing the pump in that pump house. And this is also instructive. 1916, the Steinways bought a 3.5 horsepower second-hand New Way engine, battery equipped, very modern. They had a number 502 Myers bulldozer power pump for $42. A 14-foot, 2.5-inch rubber belt that connected the motor to the pump to power the pump, and a lace, 1 belt lace to make that belt 15 cents. So this was also not an insignificant amount of money. So you also had to deal with getting mail. And there was, before we talk about that, this is a foundation for a Delco house. As I said, that electric power didn't come out until the 1930s, but a lot of these summer houses had their own generators. The Steinways had first a 12-volt Delco system. They didn't like that. They went to a 30-volt Delco system, and there would be a Delco house near the house, or sometimes just under or next to a house, there'd be a generator. And this odd trapezoidal shape you see here in the woods once in a while, when it's not being used as a base for a statue, the Delco generators were attached to this. This one was in the Howland Davis stable to provide light for the groom that lived in the stable. So mail, how did you get your mail? Well, on the north side of Long Pond, there was a communal post box, and this panoramic view shows the communal post box and a young woman either picking up mail or posting mail. And the way this worked was that everyone in the neighborhood would drop their mail off in this box, and then when somebody went to town in their horse and buggy, they would pick up all the mail and take it and drop it off at the post office in Plymouth or in Cedarville, wherever they went, and collect mail for the neighborhood, bring it back, and put it in the post box, and then the folks could come and get their mail. You can see there's a horse and buggy over here on the right. This is the Oren Line Road on the right here. This setting for this post box is right at the end of Clark Road, where Clark Road meets Oren Line Road and meets the West Long Pond Road. And today, this is what it looks like today. This might be familiar to some people who drive. If you drive to Pinewoods, if you're from Pinewoods, you drive around the north side of Long Pond, you will go by. You'll go by this. There was also the Raymond Post Office, which was for about 10 years, 1880, 1897, I think it was. There was a general store right at the end of what is now the Bourne Road, and it was owned and operated by Shadrach Raymond, and he was given a concession by the United States Postal Service, whatever it was called back then, to run a post office. So he went into business doing that approximately 1897, and apparently there was quite some competition between whether you went to the Raymond Post Office for your mail or whether you continued to use the communal post box down here. So we do have a couple of artifacts from the Raymond Post Office. Here are two postcards that were sent to Bassett's, Lida Bassett and Mary Bassett, who lived on the north end of Long Pond. This is 1907 and 1908. And you can see these were addressed to the Bassetts, Raymond, Massachusetts. And I also have, and this is a terrible photograph of a photograph, but I wanted to include it. I wanted to include it anyway. So here is a cover. Here is an envelope with the Raymond, Mass postmark on it, 1905. Somewhere I have the original of this. I couldn't quite find it for this talk, unfortunately. But I do want to talk briefly about what I had referred to as the Great Fire, because in 1900, there was a big fire that burned many houses around the ponds. It started in Carver and it burned all the way to Cape Cod Bay. It pretty much wiped out the Briggs houses and Cranberry installation at Indian Brook. Some of the houses on the west side of Long Pond were burned. Some were saved. We're going to go back here. These houses, some of them that were down close to the water were saved. What is now Pinewoods did not burn. Some of these houses did not. Many houses over here were completely burned. And houses on this side of Long Pond, if they were down close to the water, were spared because the fire was driven around Long Pond and then did not back up and go down to the eastern shore of the pond. However, on Howland Davis's land, the fire did a number on the upland here, burned a lot of trees, and that was when he decided that he was going to finish the job, take down the trees, and build a farm. And that's how the Davis farm came into being. I want to read briefly from Rose Briggs' treatise on cranberries. She talks about the fire. And she says, "You may think I date everything from before or after 1900. I do. This is the date of the Great Fire when all our buildings were burned." And we're talking about over at Indian Brook here, where the Briggses lived. "The fire took place in picking time. We still picked by hand in those days, and most of the pickers were Cape Codders, not yet the Cape Verdean Islanders. The pickers came by the family and camped out in shanties, which every bog provided for its help before the days of automobile transportation. The fire swept down on us with a sudden change of near hurricane wind. It cut off my father and the fire wagon and all the men who had any firefighting experience. They were over at Long Pond fighting the fire there when the wind changed. Of the people left on the place, some took refuge in a sand hole. The rest, including my mother and brother, age 5, in one of the waterway flumes. The fire swept over the place and finally down to the sea at Ship Pond. No one was hurt, but when my father got back, nothing was standing on the place but the hen house and the cow barn. Fortunately, the pickers' shanties were in a little hollow, and the fire skipped over them. No one had a stitch of anything except what they stood up in, and the people left on the place that night ate baked apples off the scorched apple trees. There was nothing else. That's quite a story. She goes on to say of the part of the aftermath of the fire. Before the fire, we made most of our own barrels by buying staves and hoops by the carload. After the fire, we cut our own barrel heads. We had bought a lot of scorched but not burned white pine standing. We logged it off, dumped it in the reservoir, bought a sawmill, and milled out the lumber for the buildings we had to replace, and also for the barrel heads and the crate stock. So the story goes that the Great Fire was fueled by a low pressure area that was to the west of New England. That was a large low pressure area that 5 days before had been the hurricane that destroyed Galveston, Texas on September, can't remember the date, but Galveston suffered a bad hurricane and the remains of that storm drove this fire. So we're back to the map here. In those summer folk that either were spared having their houses destroyed or decided to rebuild, enjoyed the Six Ponds area in the summer. In 1923, some of the summer folks started a yacht club because they thought that sailboat races would, quote, develop good sportsmanship and self-reliance among the children. So the Chitoli Yacht Club was born. And we have a couple of nice early photos. Oh, but before we get there, here's a boathouse. I love this picture. This is the Emery Boathouse, 1890s. I love the construction of this. And you can see this is a kind of boathouse that you took your rowboat and went right into the building. This is probably a combination of Davis's and Emery's. Taking a look here. And actually, also before we get to the yacht club, we have another old panoramic photo to look at in the neighborhood. This is where West Long Pond Road begins. This is the waterway, the brook between Little Long Pond on the right and Long Pond on the left, the bridge over the brook, and then West Long Pond Road goes up here, if you can see my cursor. Over here on the left, you can just see the big beach and Long Pond itself right here. Now, I love this photo for a number of reasons. The boats are wonderful, and the children in the boats. I love this photo. Today, this is what that scene looks like. West Long Pond Road still has a gentle hill and a corner. The brook still flows from Little Long to Long Pond. We now have a concrete bridge. You can see Long Pond over here on the left. And of course, now we have the boat ramp on Long Pond on the left and the boat ramp parking lot on the right. But this is what the Chitoli Yacht Club races on Long Pond looked like in 1923. This is taken from the Steinway's porch. This is the Pinewoods shore across the pond, and these are the gaff rig pumpkin seed sailboats that were built in the winter of 1923, 1924. So this photo is actually 1924. There was a man named Bill Elwell who had one of these boats, and he lived in what then became the main house of Camp Starro. Um, and he was the inspiration for the Chitola Yacht Club. Uh, some of the summer folks saw him out sailing on the pond and said, "Why don't we have a bunch of these boats built? And we can have our children build good sportsmanship." Uh, so the first summer we had his original boat and six more, numbered 2 through 7, and the group started racing. In the next year, 3 more were built, and here's the same location, looking at what looks to me to be a downwind start, perhaps, um, for a sailboat race. Again, across the pond, we have Pinewoods Camp. At that point, of course, it was Pine Tree Camp and the Conants area up here. I love the clothes, 1924, 1925. Most people have a hat. The gentlemen, no doubt, were wearing neckties. Most of them are looking at the boats, but this guy here holding a model sailboat, you can see he's wearing a necktie. The men in these short pants, the women in long dresses. Everyone's got shoes on. The knickers or the pants or knickers. Everyone has shoes. Everyone has long stockings, and they're at the beach. And quite a beautiful beach. I wish we had a beach like this today. I'm going to bring the focus a little bit here onto Pinewoods Camp because among the earliest summer folk was Helen Starro. Helen Starro came to Long Pond as a friend of Lydia Russell Davis, who was a schoolmate of hers. And Lydia Russell Davis married Carl Davis, and they had a place, still do, his descendants still do, right here on Long Pond. But Mrs. Starro so liked here that she bought large pieces of land on Round and Long Ponds before 1914. We don't know exactly when. I haven't done the deed research on that, but it was sometime before 1914. Now, Mrs. Starro was an influential person. She had numerous philanthropic interests, including historic preservation, education for newly arrived immigrant girls. She was active in the early Girl Scouts. She had an interest in English folk dance, believing that dancing was good spiritual, social, and physical exercise and part of a vigorous life. Her land included what is now Pinewoods Camp, where she established the first Girl Scout leader training program. She started it in 1916 at her residence in Boston and moved it to her land on Long Pond in 1919, and it was called Pine Tree Camp. And training at the Pine Tree Camp continued until about 1935 or so. We do have a photograph. This came from, I believe, the Pinewoods archives. This is Pine Tree Camp, Long Pond, Plymouth. Post Office, Borndale RFD, Rural Free Delivery. The RFD probably killed the Raymond Post Office, which was why it only lasted about 10 years. Rural Free Delivery out of Borndale, which then became Buzzards Bay, was started about 1908, 1909. And if you could get your mail delivered for free, why not? So that's what RFD stands for. This is now the camp house of Pinewoods Camp, and it looks like this mostly today. Her interest in traditional dance, Helen Starro's interest, was spurred by visits to Europe, where she became a devotee of Cecil Sharp and helped him try to promote folk dancing in the US. forming the American branch of the English Folk Dance Society, which then became the Boston center of the Country Dance Society. Sharp had a teacher working for him named Lily Roberts, who came to the USA to teach dance, and Lily Roberts and Mrs. Storrow became lifelong friends. Lily Roberts married a man named Richard Conant, and they lived together with the Storrows on the Pine Tree property, running Pine Tree Camp and then Pinewoods Camp with Mrs. Storrow until her death in 1944. After the Girl Scout Training Center was moved, Pine Tree Camp became Pine Woods and was a center for country dance and song as it remains today. When Mrs. Storrow died in 1944, the Conants inherited the property, and they ran Pinewoods until Pinewoods Camp, Inc. was formed in 1976. And the Conant descendants are still involved, of course, with Pinewoods Camp and still occupy a portion of the property. Mrs. Storrow then perhaps sold some of her other land to the Girl Scouts, and there were two Girl Scout camps that were formed. Over here we had Camp Four Winds, which became Dorothy Carleton. They changed the name at one point. And then down here we had Camp Helen Storrow. And these ran as Girl Scout camps until Helen Storrow, I believe, was the mid-70s. There was a bad winter, and the main dining hall of the camp roof caved in under a heavy snow, and they couldn't afford to replace it or fix it. So they sold the camp. The Girl Scouts, around about this time, decided to consolidate their camp into a camp they also owned over here on Little Long and Gallows Pond called Camp Wind in the Pines. And Camp Wind in the Pines is a healthy going concern today. You go past the driveway when you drive the West Long Pond Road. So Camp Storrow closed, and the Girl Scout Council did the local people a good turn by not selling the property to real estate developers who were eager to buy it and who could have put maybe a dozen houses in there. But they agreed to sell the property to a consortium of local people around the pond. And as a result, instead of a dozen or 15 lots, Camp Storrow just became 6 lots. And some of the local people were able to acquire the land there. The same thing happened some years later up at Four Winds, Dorothy Carleton. Developer under the zoning regs at the time might have been able to put, I don't know, 25 houses in there, possibly 20 houses maybe. And but they went to a group of local people, and they said, okay, we will just sell it to you and break it into a small number of lots. So the assessor's map, this is a 2005 assessor's map, and you can see it's the same view. You can see that these were some of the lots that used to be Camp Storrow. These are some of the lots that were Camp Four Winds. Now, when those lots were formed, there were deed restrictions that prevented further subdivision for 30 years. After 30 years, some of those properties were subsequently further divided. You can see up here, this was one of those further subdivisions up here. And since 2005, there have been more subdivisions down here. But nonetheless, the size of the lots are still greater than you see over here on Round Pond. And you can tell if you look over here, that Round Pond property was just a couple of lots here, and now it's a number of very small lots up in here. Interestingly, down in this area, this is Thrasher land. It was divided into very small lots sometime before 1949. Um, so the Staros, the Conants, who lived with the Staros, they joined the Chitola Yacht Club in 1935, 1934. Back in those days, you had to have one of those pumpkin seed sailboats or use of one of those pumpkin seed sailboats in order to join the yacht club. Um, Mrs. Starro joined the yacht club in 1941. And we have here, I think this is a lot of fun, we have here the minutes of the annual meeting of the Chitola Yacht Club. Uh, and the following new members were elected: Mrs. James J. Starro. And then these three names here, John Teal and John and Peter Downing, these were young men that had come over from England during the early stages of the war when England was getting bombed during the Blitz. A number of philanthropic Americans, including the Morgans who lived on Long Pond, would provide homes for young men who were essentially refugees, uh, trying to, their parents would send them away for the duration of the war because they were, certainly worried about anyone surviving. And interestingly, at this 1941 meeting, uh, boat number 15, the Red Start, belonging to Richard Conan, was admitted to the club in 1941. Uh, it having been measured by a majority of the defunct measuring committee and found correct. The minutes of the Chitola Yacht Club, there's a lot of humor involved. Uh, the yacht club never took itself all that seriously, and it still doesn't. And in fact, I like to say the only serious thing about the Chitola Yacht Club is the competition. But Mrs. Starro was happy to become a member. She sent Secretary Steinway this letter. I love this stationery, Cornish Point, Buzzards Bay, RFD. Dear Mr. Steinway, I am very proud to become a member of the Chitola Yacht Club, and thank you, and have my young English boys join also. John Teal is taking our dues to you this afternoon if they are not lost in an upset. Very sincerely, Helen Starro. So, interestingly enough, there were two occasions where Helen Starro would have given away her land before she died. In 1914, she offered some of it to the son of her friend Lydia Russell Davis, who occupied a summer place right here, but they declined, saying that it was too much of a financial burden. Carl S. Davis and Sybil, his wife, decided that it would have been too much for them to handle. My bet is that this contiguous land was what they were offered, but it may have been Pinewoods. And then sometime around 1940, she offered what I believe to be, what I'm told was the Pinewoods property, to her niece, a woman named Anne Osborne. And Anne declined because her husband, she'd just gotten married, her husband was from Buffalo, New York, and they were planning on making their life there in Buffalo. Uh, Unfortunately, the husband died early in the war, served in the armed forces, and was killed early in the war. Anne Osborne came back to New England, married a man named Chase, and their descendants have been cited a time or two around the Long Pond area. But it's interesting that if either of those offers had been accepted, we might not have Pinewoods today, but we're not quite sure. The most visible remnant of the Camp Starro would be this stone boathouse that if you've been out on a boat in Long Pond, you would probably be familiar with. And we also have this photograph. This is a postcard. There's actually a better clearer version of this on the Pinewoods website. But this is Pinewoods Camp in Long Pond Country Dance Society. You know, they still have a dock right about the same location. So as I had told Chris, if you put a nickel in me, I can talk about this stuff for hours, but we're going to end it right here. I want to just offer a few acknowledgments. Um, Certainly Ruth Steinway's book here. A lot of the information I get came out of this book here and from her collection of papers and related material that she used to put this book together. The Emery Russell family, thank you, Ed and Charlotte. They provided some photographs and some counsel. Pinewoods Archives and the website, I took a few things from. There's a privately published monograph about the life of Helen Starrow that I took a few things from. And then I took a lot of things by my own sitting at my grandmother's knee when I was a boy and taking in her stories. So I only ran 10 minutes late, maybe 5 minutes, but I'm done. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to entertain them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam. What a fabulous presentation, and just learning so much, and some others are chiming in on the chat that they learned a lot as well. If you arrived late or you want to go back and see this before we start answering questions, in case folks have to go, I am posting, we do have a YouTube channel, and this presentation along with the others will be posted to that. So I'm just going to send that over into the chat. And also it will get posted to our Pinewoods page about the Six Ponds area. And I just also want to put a plug in for our next presentation, which is on, I believe, Tuesday, April 23rd, which is about the conservation efforts in the biodiversity of the Six Ponds area. And Karen Gray will be kicking it off, talking about the history and current efforts of conservation. And then there'll be a panel of educator naturalists, including Blake Dinius, the entomologist educator for Plymouth County, Steve French from Mass Audubon's Southeastern Sanctuaries, and then myself. So we'll be talking about all the great species that are found here. And I'm putting that link in there too. So we have lots of questions, Sam. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. So the very first question came like way at the beginning. What year was the Thrasher House built?
Well, we don't know for sure. We early 1800s, no later than that, 1820 maybe. Carol Gregg, who owns and occupies that house, may know. I haven't had a chance to ask her. It might be as early as the late 1700s. So that's as much as I know on that.
Excellent. Someone was asking if Mrs. Sturrow was as in Sturrow Drive. And the answer is
Yes, James J. and Helen Starrow were great philanthropists, and there's an interesting story about that. They were a believer in, greenery, inner city open spaces, and they arranged to have the, what is the Esplanade and that area in Boston, available as a city, a Riverside City Park. One of their requests, though, was that there be no roads through there. It had to be just open area. James Starrow died in the 1920s. Helen died in 1944, and sometime after that, the city of Boston decided it would be a great place for a 6-lane highway. So they built what they now call Starrow Drive. So yes, the short answer to that question is yes. The Starrow of Pinewoods Camp and the Starrow of Starrow Drive, one and the same.
And Sam, what's so interesting is today I received an email that was forwarded to me by CDSS from Miss Lucy Carey Osborne which was the is the great niece of Helen Starrow. And so I am anxious to be able to reach out to her. I think she has a photo that she would like to give to us. So I'm really excited to connect with her. So yeah.
Nice, nice. Yep.
So let's see. Where did the name Chitola come from?
Chitola is reportedly a Native American word that means this peaceful place.
Hmm.
Now, I only have my grandmother's say so on that, so I have no other evidence. But of course, we all know grandmothers never lie, so we believe her.
Awesome. All right. So the next question, and by the way, you can ask questions one of two ways. You can either raise your hand using the little hand raising feature, or you can just put it chat in and I'll ask the questions for you. So either way, so David Abbott says that he knows that you have spent a lot of time diving the depths of Long Pond. What are some of the interesting things that you've seen down there?
Oh, underneath the waters of Long Pond. Um, well, supposedly there are some automobiles down there. There are stories about, people wanting to get rid of junk cars in the 1930s and 20s, so they drove them out on the ice and waited for the ice to break up. Long Pond is very deep. It's one of the deepest natural ponds in the state, and so it's over 100 feet deep. Um, I have seen plenty of fish. I've seen plenty of mud. I've seen plenty of fishing rods. Uh, in the shallows, I've retrieved plenty of hockey pucks because when you play pond hockey and a puck goes through a hole in the ice, that's it. You're not generally going to go in after it. Um, there are rocky areas, there are muddy areas. I have a handful of old bottles that I've found on Long Pond. That's as close to treasure as I can come. I know I have personal knowledge of more than one outboard motor that's down there that people have lost because they didn't quite tighten it down enough in their boat. Um, those will remain lost. Um, no treasure chests that I can remember seeing. Uh, but I hope that's enough of an answer, David, of some of the things that I've seen down there.
Excellent. So the next question is, how did Gallows Pond get its name? Do you know the history behind that?
I do know the story. I did mention briefly Branch Pierce, whose picture is in the book. Branch Pierce was a famous hunter, and apparently, killed hundreds of deer in his career. And he used to hang them up on a tree by Gallows Pond, to gut them and let them bleed, which is what one does with a deer. And that's how it got the name Gallows Pond, because Mr. Pierce would hang his deer carcasses there.
Interesting. All right. So the next question is, do you know how the Starrow got his wealth?
I don't. I don't. I know that Mrs. Storrow also came from a fairly wealthy family from central New York State. Uh, he was a banker. James Storrow was a banker in the days, before banking regulations were too strict. So one presumes he was a successful investor. Um, the little booklet I have on the Starrows may have more info on that. That's as much as I know.
Excellent. All right. So, someone here had found this book at the Pilgrim Hall Museum, but
Hmm.
has since lost their copy, and would be interested in inquiring another. Do you know if it's being sold presently, and if so, where?
I don't think it's being sold anywhere. I do have a little stash of them, and which I would be willing to, provide to people who have a sincere interest. So, uh, whoever asked that question, pass their info on to me, and we'll probably be able to take care of them.
All right, so the next question is, other than Daniel Webster, have there been other famous visitors to the Six Ponds?
Well, interesting. Yes, the one I can think of, the poet Sylvia Plath was a camper at Camp Helen Starrow in the early 1950s, and her journals uh, mention Camp Starrow a number of times, quite favorably. Uh, she had a great experience as a Girl Scout camper at Camp Starrow. Um, and if you're looking for other famous people, uh, as far as, high profile folks, uh, it's about the only thing I can come up with.
All right. Uh, someone saying President Taft, perhaps?
Not to my knowledge, but that doesn't mean, now Grover Cleveland, who was a president, he used to fish on the Agawam River. He had a summer White House at Gray Gables on the Cape. Um, and this was before the Cape Cod Canal, of course. Uh, and he would go up on the Agawam River to the Squirrel's Nest hunting camp, they called it. Um, and, interestingly enough, there are plenty of references to this part of Plymouth being part of Cape Cod. And it was considered part of the Cape before they built the canal. Once they built the canal, then there was this more or less artificial barrier where, you cross the bridges, you're on the Cape. So it's not no longer. My brother has an interesting map. It's one of those maps with a lot of figures and a lot of illustrations, and it was made about in the 1930s, I guess, and it's got, bathing beauties under umbrellas on the Cape beaches and fishermen and the steamboats and, airplanes going over. And it's an image of Cape Cod, and up on the upper right, it has the canal, and up on the upper right, there's a little sign that says, Plymouth is not on Cape Cod.
That's awesome. All right, so Charles Davis is saying also Van Cliburn, Alan Arkin, Amanda Plummer. So as people that have been to Six Ponds.
There, yes, there were the Steinway family was involved with a lot of musical and theatrical artists who would sometimes come to visit.
Awesome. All right. All right. Any other questions? Well, this was fascinating. Oh, and someone did say, oh, Debbie says that there is a copy of this book also in the Plymouth Public Library's history room. So very cool. Oh, and so wants to know, when does the Ninth Grade Lot second volume hit the press? You have another project, it sounds like, Sam.
I'm still going through the papers left when my grandmother put this one together. And I'm not sure my research talents are nearly as good as hers. Let me put it to you this way: if I live long enough, I might do volume 2.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And again, we're so excited, and it was wonderful seeing so many neighbors here tonight. And please say hello when you're walking West Long Pond, and I'm driving by or walking. And we hope to see everyone to learn more about the Six Ponds region on Tuesday, April 23rd. So thank you so much. And thank you, Sam. This was amazing. So,
Well, it was fun for me, and I'm happy for the opportunity. Uh, and if you want to go to midnight, we can go to midnight, but probably not.
great. Thank you. And I'll be sending out, once we get the YouTube link up, the loop on the YouTube channel, I will send that link out to everyone that registered. So in case you're late, or for those that weren't here tonight. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great night.
All
Thank
right, good
you,
night.
Pam. Thank you. Bye now. Bye, Meg.